Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2025 Capstone presentations of two IHC Public Humanities Graduate Fellows. I'm Susan Derwin. I'm the director of the Public Humanities program and also of the IHC. I'm happy that you're all here to learn about the work our fellows have done, and I am confident that you're going to be both inspired and impressed by their accomplishments. I want to introduce, you already know him, everybody, Chris Boberg. Chris is not only the IHC Associate Director, but he also is the Fellows Program Coordinator, and he also teaches a Public Humanities seminar. So allow me to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional custodians of the land upon which the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center is located. I would also like to pay respect to elders, past and present, as well as other indigenous people present. I'll start by giving you a bit of background about the program. So the Public Humanities Graduate Fellows Program started 7 years ago, and its purpose was to prepare PhD students for careers as publicly engaged humanists both inside and outside of the academy. And this program is independent of any single academic department. So it brings together about 40 PhD students in any given year from all areas of the humanities and the humanistic social sciences. Fellows in the program complete 2 seminars. The first addresses the theories, pedagogies, and cultural practices associated with public humanities, as well as the emergence and the institutional history of the land-grant university system, of which we are a part, which the UCs are a part, or a representative, or an instance. We're not a part, because it's not a system, but we are a land-grant university. The second seminar enables fellows to develop the skills they need to work in the public sphere. So fellows study how to communicate skillfully with diverse groups and communities, how to build and sustain relationships with community partners. They develop basic digital skills. They study grant writing and budget creation, project management, how to write and podcast for diverse public audiences. And this is not even an exhaustive list. In addition, though, to their coursework, Public Humanities Fellows complete a 200-hour community-based paid summer internship with a partnering organization. That organization might be a cultural foundation, an arts nonprofit, a governmental office, a community center, or a social justice or humanitarian organization. And after completing their internship, fellows can then elect to develop their own community-based project, which they have created and which we also support. Finally, to complete their training, each fellow gives a capstone presentation, which is why we are all here today. And as you will see, they're going to talk about the work they've done in the program and also how they understand the value and purpose of the public humanities and their own evolving identities as scholars and public humanists. So today, 2 of our fellows are going to make their capstone presentations, and then we're going to have time for you, our audience members, to ask them questions. So I will introduce our first presenter, and then afterwards, after she's done, our second. So our first presenter is Tanishta Bhattacharjee. Tanishta is a PhD candidate in the Department of History. Her current research topics include post-colonial state-making, migration and displacement, and subaltern religions in India. She holds undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of Delhi, and as a public humanities fellow, she seeks to engage her research with wider publics beyond academia through community-directed knowledge, critical fabulation, she can tell you what that is. If you don't know, be sure to ask her, and mixed media digital storytelling. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Tanishta.
Hello. So I'll begin with introducing myself. Sorry, 1 second. Thank you for being here, firstly. My name is Tanishtha. I am a sixth-year grad student in the Department of History currently. I work on 20th century South Asia, and as Professor Doan earlier said, I'm focusing particularly on displacement that occurred in the northeastern part of India between 1950 and 1970. For the purpose of public humanities, the Graduate Fellowship of Public Humanities, I was assigned the Santa Barbara Foundation that I worked with last summer between June and August in a hybrid mode as the marketing and communications intern. My responsibilities included communication, writing, graphic design, research, organization of data for the projects that they were currently doing. To give you an overview of two key types of projects that I worked on, the first kind was writing, researching, interviewing, and putting together donor and grant-making impact stories. One of the donor stories that I wrote and interviewed for using my background in oral history was interviewing this man called Steve Lyons about his transitional age youth home that he's making in downtown Santa Barbara. Apart from that, I also worked on two other grant-making impact stories that addressed digital equity in Santa Barbara County and childcare infrastructural expansion in the county. I also wrote a bunch of press releases. But apart from that, the other key project that I worked on was this annual report of the Santa Barbara Foundation, which was released in late 2024, and it pertains to 2023. The primary work that I did for this, and this was massive, was coordinating with all the nonprofit partners that Santa Barbara Foundation had worked with in the past year, which was approximately 50 organizations across the county, on specific projects that they got funded for by the Santa Barbara Foundation. I collected pictures, organized them, cataloged them, and helped my editor choose pictures, edit them, and place them in the report itself. So if you see any pictures here, they were all collected because of emails and coordination that I did. Moving on, the coursework that I performed at the university here prepared me immensely for these tasks. The first thing that I learned from coursework was exposure to the American nonprofit ecosystem. As an international student from India, I was not familiar with how American nonprofits work and what kind of grant, like funding, impact, reports, and everything, and the laws that sort of govern them. So it was helpful to know that. Then I also practiced what various kinds of public-facing media, production of media of various kinds of public like podcasts that you mentioned, but also more importantly, writing. Although as academics, we do write for the public, but it was more helpful to write for publics in this particular context. Practice doing that. And thirdly, I also learned a bunch of technical skills, like designing sample campaigns and what kind of digital tools I can use for the same. There are other skills and takeaways that I took away from the internship. I think that there are three instrumental ones that I can name now. First, what is it that is distinct about marketing media? Be it in terms of what kind of visual media they create or what kind of textual literary media they produce. There's a specific goal that marketing involves, and that's what I learned at this internship, and it's different from the academic writing that I do. The second thing that I learned is Santa Barbara Foundation has a specific mediatory role it plays in the community. It sort of is the in-between organization that connects donors with money with nonprofits that need that money. And so they sort of, in this coordination, there's a very specific vocabulary they want to use in their marketing products to represent that role. So it was a very nuanced position that I had to learn about, and that was very enlightening for me too. The third thing that I learned, I think, is the culture of communication that Santa Barbara Foundation practices within the organization and also with their partners, their nonprofit partners outside. And as, again, the kinds of communication that I am used to within the academic world come with certain protocols and certain conventions, but here the conventions were very different as to how to coordinate within departments on a large project with very multiple layers of deadlines and how to smoothen all of that process and organizing work. I think I learned a lot from the foundation regarding that. The impact that this internship had on me was twofold, apart from, of course, learning all the technical organizing tools that I used. But apart from that, I think as a historian who also works with ethnography, I am thinking now about how to produce historical and sociological research that helps nonprofits in the context that I work on. How does it help nonprofits in that context make their grant or shape their grant-making priorities? How may they design the surveys that they do before making a grant, and how they could see the structural nature of dispossession in the community that they're working with. It depends a lot on the way I write and the avenues that I present my research in for them to see it in order to do meaningful work in the community. So I think it gives me a new perspective of how to write my research. I also actually learned how to engage my research with a more humanistic focus at the Santa Barbara Foundation. They kept telling me that focus on the human aspect of structural change, like make a story beyond the data that you would read in reports, and how you should present complex reality in relatable terms, and what kind of difference that can make to a nonprofit that's operating in that sector. So the future that I envision for myself after all of this experience from the classes and the internship and reflecting on my internship are threefold. Firstly, I would really want to be entrenched in the local, wherever it is that I head after my PhD, whether primarily like in India, because even if I don't work in India after this, if I stay in the United States, I would still like to be linked to the place that I'm from, because there's so much difference that contextualization and local knowledge can make, especially in shaping nonprofit work. Secondly, I also want to write differently in my own academic world, thinking about now practice that can emanate from the theory that I write. So even if I'm writing a theoretical paper, I would think about the practices that can change because of the theory that I write. And thirdly, I think this is very important for me, particularly because I realize that philanthropists exist everywhere, and they really want to do meaningful difference. They make a meaningful change in the communities they're a part of, but often there are solutions available to them that are very limited. So I want to think about political solutions for philanthropists to implement this beyond just donating money, beyond just what what a standard definition of philanthropy is. So I've been thinking about that, and I hope to come at a solution that is beyond just donating money by the time I graduate and I'm entrenched in the local, wherever it is that I work. But that's all I have. Thank you for listening. I'll take any questions that you have in the Q&A session.
Okay, Tanisha, thank you so much. All right, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Cypress Rolsvik, a fifth-year PhD student in classics. They study literary portrayals of queerness in ancient Greek myth and Latin poetry, ancient storytelling, and how people build community by telling stories. Currently, Cypress is excavating beneath a historic adobe home for the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. And for the last 3 years, they have been a graduate teaching fellow in the IHC's Foundations in the Humanities program, where they are now also a lead mentor training other graduate instructors. So, Cypress, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cypress. Like Susan just said, I'm a PhD student in classics. Last summer, I interned at the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation. Better? Okay. While working there, I contributed to the public interpretation of this town's layered histories, including archival research, visitor experience, and community engagement. During my internship, I worked on a number of public-facing projects. I helped advertise for and run community events like the Asian American Film Festival, where I saw firsthand how culturally responsive programming can spark meaningful conversations. At the Visitor Center, I opened and closed the sites, I welcomed guests, I helped with admissions and merchandise. These daily interactions, working with the people living and visiting Santa Barbara, taught me how important it is to meet people face to face when talking about local history. Probably the most fun part of my summer was when I co-led an archaeology summer camp group for 3rd and 4th graders. Just by sharing my love of ancient objects, the kids lit up in excitement, and even one girl said she wanted to grow up to become an archaeologist someday. I also gained hand-on experience doing public-facing research. Working with Shannon Taribo, another alum of this project, on the oral history project Monongs on the Central Coast, I helped edit and index the oral history recordings, and I supported the opening event. This museum exhibit documents the lives of first-generation Filipino-American men and their families, and it is currently on exhibit at Casa de la Guerra. Working with these community members and their families taught me not just to hear what's being said, but to listen to how it's being said, the tone, the emotions, the memories, and how that changes details, who remembers what, and who is on different sides of the same story. That kind of listening is crucial for preserving public history with clarity and care. By reading and discussing the history and ethics of public humanities in the IHC's courses, I thought more critically about who has access, what one's audience is, and the multiple narratives of history. One of the most important takeaways for me was the idea that work in the public humanities changes the questions that we ask. I learned that public humanities should encourage both individuals and communities to critically reflect upon and question their own history and values. This ensures that everyone becomes more aware of social issues and therefore more empowered to participate in public activism. At the Presidio, I picked up a bunch of new technical skills, like using the Library of Congress's filing system and the metadata database of the Presidio Research Library. One of the most important aspects of this internship was working with the subject files in that library. These vertical files are organized by topic, places, people, cultural groups, and they're often the first stop for researchers who want to learn more about local Santa Barbara history. I helped organize, label, and sort these materials. This gave me a better sense of how information gets categorized and how these decisions shape what people are able to find. I sharpened my professional skills by coordinating with staff across departments and getting trained on how to give tours that communicate historical complexity to all different types of people. I also became familiar with managing admissions, merchandise, and visitor flow using point-of-sale systems. Working across departments and learning to collaborate with different teams definitely helped me grow professionally. And working directly with the public, young people and their families, helped me become a better communicator. One challenge that really stuck with me when working with the Trust and the local downtown library was during the Wikiathon event series. I learned about local legend Ida Addis, a 19th century Mexican-American poet and news writer who was locally and nationally praised. One day, she suddenly disappeared under suspicious circumstances, and concerning the Stork family and the Santa Barbara News Press. As a scholar and a grad student, most of my research is isolating. It's me and my books alone in an office or a library. I wasn't used to relying on others with more experience and knowledge than I could get by myself. I wasn't accustomed to this specific type of collaborative information production. My methods weren't working, so I had to switch gears. I enlisted help from the other community members taking part in the Wikiathon. I heard their advice for how to sensibly represent Ida's life and her influence on the Santa Barbara community from Santa Barbara locals. These community experts taught me the ins and outs of Wikipedia's editing protocols. Alongside the other Wikiathon members, I'm still working to update her Wikipedia page, aiming to make it less biased and more comprehensive of her influence. This makes me think about how we responsibly talk about historical figures, especially stories that involve trauma, gender, and power, and how we can do that respectfully. This program has shown me that public engagement can inform and also inspire academic work. I'm thinking differently now about how to bring my engagement, my public engagement, into the classroom and how to bring my own work back into the community. To incorporate this into my undergrad teaching, I focus on engaging students with real-world content and practical applications of their learnings. I invite students to question assumptions, to analyze information, and to critique sources. Looking ahead, I'm interested in a job at a museum or a library or an archive. I will likely apply to careers focused on visitor experience, educational or cultural programming, and outreach coordination. But wherever I end up, I want to keep working with community partners to make historical knowledge public and empowering. Public humanities initiatives are important because they amplify marginal voices, they challenge dominant narratives, and they promote critical thinking. By highlighting underrepresented perspectives and fostering dialogue between all kinds of peoples, public humanities can contribute to a more just and equitable society. But what does public humanities really mean? For me, it means listening to and learning from one another. By sharing knowledge, we can promote a better collective understanding and an appreciation of diversity. This collaboration strengthens the bonds between people and helps them feel like they belong. I consider myself a public humanist, whether I'm working with ancient texts, Wikipedia, 20th century newspapers, or teaching kids fun facts about history. To me, the value of the public humanities lies in its ability to build bridges, not just between the ancient and the modern, but between people, between academic research and community knowledge. It's about honoring the many different ways that people understand and connect with history. What drives me is the desire to make knowledge accessible, meaningful, and inclusive, and to keep learning from that community, the one that I am proud to be a part of. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. It was great. Tanishta, I have a question for you. So as your own research is different from what your internship experience was, but I would like to learn if you found like any surprises, any parallels between your work in India, like you work on migrant communities, culinary histories, and Santa Barbara Foundation also works with like 50 plus nonprofits. So were there any surprises for you during the internship?
Thank you, Jahan, for that question. Yes, the first thing I would say to that is that the similarity that I found between my work and my marketing experience was thinking about infrastructure, because I got to actually work on two infrastructural projects that they were funding. First one was digital equity. So since in my own research, I work on the history of infrastructure distribution and its inequity in Northeast India, like I work on electricity, sanitation, housing, just to be a part of this context and see how the state has intervened or not in ensuring equity of infrastructure distribution. Like in my head, I was comparing it with what I know about my context that I research on and how things are so different, what constitutes inequity, what constitutes distribution, what constitutes infrastructure, how nonprofits get involved in that space that the state has left for them to intervene in terms of assuring infrastructure for different kinds of people. That was interesting for me to just think about theoretically. I will say that I cannot help but be an academic in my head. As much as practical day-to-day work at the foundation involved different kinds of tasks, and I was being an academic while I was reading and engaging. But the challenge here was that even though I was theorizing in my head, I had to write an impact story about someone who benefited from, let's say a survey that Santa Barbara Foundation funded in the city of Guadalupe, a little bit up north from here. So there is that was the moment where what I said, the humanistic aspect of structural difference, like that's where I saw it happen. Like it was a challenge for me to focus on the humanistic aspect of it a little bit at first. And I think that was how I learned, and I became bigger, even in the way I think, from that moment on. And the other thing that I would say is that India is so different in terms of how nonprofits operate, what it means to be in a nonprofit office, how tasks are distributed, how they interact with the community, how they interact with philanthropists. It's not it's not as neat a relationship as I found it to be here. And I think Santa Barbara Foundation partly does the work of making it neat. The transaction between a donor to the foundation they do that work and make it very transparent, neat, and they report it back through various mechanisms. But in India, the nonprofit sector is just so different from my past experience in it.
I guess I'd just like to know a little bit more about the way the program works and hear from maybe both of you how you went about choosing the particular internship that you did, how and why you chose that particular internship.
Out of the limited options, I chose the trust because it dealt with material artifacts and public history. I had a little experience working in an archaeological museum in my undergrad, and I really liked the ability to be within the public, within the community, to actually get to know where I was living and to be a part of the town. So that was why I picked this one, because it gave me an in to meet people and to make friends in addition to having a job.
I think partly I echo what Cyprus's sentiments were about how to choose an internship. Number one, last summer, this was one of the two options, and I chose this because it was offering the possibility of working hybrid, and I wasn't sure of my summer plans. I usually use the summer to go back to India to do field work, because who knows if I'm funded through the year to get any field work done. Number one, it's that. And the second thing is, I think marketing and communication to me presented such a challenge as an idea, because I'm so used to being a historian who works on 20th century India, and I also wanted to know what Santa Barbara is like, and what are the issues here, and what kinds of realities operate here that an organization works towards, and how that is presented in a marketing and communications context felt like a challenge to me. And also, there has been a side of me from my early undergrad days where I was involved in magazine editing, both in terms of graphic designing and literary editing. And so that part of me had ceased to sort of exist over the last few years of becoming a serious academic who needs to get grants, who needs to, get dissertation chapters going. So I felt like I needed this. Plus, I think, like you said, having a job in the summer here is important to pay the rent, which is super high. So I think that also was a huge part of this. I also wanted to work with the community in India, but I could not get that started on time. And I was also thinking about the clock ticking in terms of where I stand in my graduate program. It's my 6th year now. So end of 5th year was a good time to get the internship done. Thank you.
Just want to add a couple of things. So last summer we had 2 interns. I think we're going to have about 8 this year. The program really is fluid in terms of its the number of students who are actively doing internships just because of the pacing of their course of study. But I just want to say the students don't just choose their internships. They have to be chosen. This is a competitive process. They have to apply. Sometimes no one is chosen. So it's not that they're guaranteed of anything, and they really have to be deemed a compatible colleague, really, to work in the organization. And I just want to say, the organization pays for half of this. The students our students are not going out as guests being hosted. They're really, we are sharing costs, and there are rigorous expectations, they have skin in the game, which we think is very important. I had one more thing I wanted to say. in this case, I mean, in Cyprus's case, you do historical work, but you did many things there. And Tanishta, you talked about I mean, how this sort of complemented and the work you're doing, but also enabled you to return to certain interests that had fallen along the wayside. But we really want students to work in internships that have nothing to do with their academic course of study. In other words, we tell our partners, this is a structural selection, it's not a content-driven selection, because that's what makes for nimbleness. That's what makes for learning about the culture of an organization, bringing your skill sets to them, and seeing how you can sort of go with those demands. So we really are, we were quite unhappy, Cyprus, that you were, as a historian, went there. Just kidding. And in fact, what often happens is that students then get hired on after the internships to keep working in the organization. This is not unusual. It happens to our students all of the time. So there's futures that open up too, but they're really, not determined by the academic priorities of our students.
I have a question for Cyprus. I was really interested in the youth archaeology program, and because inspiring the youth is always like, oh, that's amazing. So I'm curious of how, what the program was like, and maybe how you intentionally or unintentionally was involved in inspiring the youth for the archaeology program.
So it happens every summer, the second week of July. So if you know any third or fourth graders, it's happening again this year, and I was invited back to join, so I will go and volunteer. It's almost entirely funded by the Trust, which is a nonprofit, so they have fundraisers and they pay for the kids to come. It's a week long, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. We had, as you saw in the picture, maybe 4 or 5 kids, so it's really intimate. And they excavate an actual trench in the second defense wall of the Presidio, which is by a trash pit. So there's a lot of food, animal bones, ceramic pottery pieces. And yeah, it's set up exactly like a real excavation. They have field journals, they take notes. Nick, who's the director of visitor experiences, is a seasoned archaeologist, as well as Mike, the cultural resources director. So they basically take them step through step of cleaning, digging, pulling out artifacts, putting them in bags, and then sorting them. And then they go off to the lab, and it's real research.
Well, thank you both. I'm just so happy and proud of you and excited to see what your next